Yes, good morning. I was enjoying watching people join the meeting. In a different sense to usual, it does give a very strong sense of Sangha, I find. Those of you that I'm hearing from, the emails, those of you that speak, just seeing different faces pop up, different sorts of connections, which I'm sure we all have with each other. Very lovely. So this morning, I want to talk a bit about right view. I've been dropping it in and given some senses of the wisdom perspective of the practice, and that it is a wisdom practice. That's its aim, if you like. That's its aim, and its method, as I said at the beginning, is through this very receptive, very relaxed mind and body that allows the perspective to perhaps be more open than usual. So it's different to perhaps the laser focus of concentration practice. It works in a different way. It's really open, and yet with that sensitivity and precision that I've talked about. So when I'm talking about wisdom, I'm talking about insight. Again, a bit like the mind. I was saying about the mind yesterday. It's easy to see it as a thing, the mind that's a thing, rather than something that cannot really be found, can't be located, but it can be known in different moments of our experience, in different present moments of our experience. And the mind is made up of these different faculties, but also different qualities. And in that waterfall, I talked about a waterfall going over rocks, all these different droplets. We've got the droplets of mind moments and mind qualities. And certainly at the beginning of practice, often quite a lot of those mind moments, those mind droplets, are droplets of delusion, droplets of unclear seeing, droplets of habits, biases in the mind, ways of acting, ways of thinking, feeling that are driven by much habitual moments. And what we're doing in practice is really encouraging more moments of clear seeing. And that clear seeing will be of different degrees. And a bit like with the continuity of awareness, we're encouraging more moments in our experience, mindfulness of awareness. And it's the same with wisdom. And I don't have time to go into the 3 levels of wisdom, but they're quite an interesting, I'm sure a lot of you are very familiar with them. They're a very good way of, each of them is a level of wisdom. And in some ways, whether it's the level of right information, which is the first level of wisdom, or those little moments of making connections, which is perhaps more the second level of wisdom, or the third level of wisdom, where it's a clear seeing that doesn't leave. Actually, they're all in the territory of wisdom, of the mind that's seeing more clearly, but to different degrees. So I mentioned at some point, I think I said Joseph Goldstein talks about how we tend to perceive things in quite a superficial way. I was just trying to look for a little reading I have about this and I couldn't find it. But in it, he's making a distinction between the superficial perceptions where we sort of skim over experience, we skim over, and what I call a sort of best guess. We have a best guess at what's happening in experience, and sometimes we're more or less right, and sometimes we get it very wrong. Often our judgments about people are a good example of this. We think that somebody is like that because we picked up maybe on one or two things about them that maybe happen 2 or 3 times. But what the delusive mind is always looking to do is to try and make sense, is to try and fix something as being like this or like that. That's why it makes these best guesses. And these best guesses create a lot of suffering and create a lot of reading our world and our experience and other people in incorrect ways. So with this practice, we're looking to train the mind to try and notice these misperceptions, these superficial perceptions. Because what Joseph says in this little reading that I can't find is that if we add mindfulness to the perceptual process, then we're able to see more clearly. Already we're able to see more clearly. We're able to see a little bit more deeply. And that's partly because what we're looking at is our direct experience. We're looking more with mindfulness, with awareness practice, at what's actually happening to some degree. There are obviously levels of that. And we're less involved in the concepts, the ideas about what's happening. So this is very this is probably very obvious to you, but it's actually surprisingly hard to do, isn't it? To be with what's actually happening rather than with the idea. I talked about it with seeing, the tendency to go out to the objects of sight. You know, what's beyond the window in my cabin, the objects rather than the process of the seeing is happening. The objects will be known, they'll be recognized, perception will do its job as best it's able to. But what's more significant is to know one's own mental and physical processes. That's the work of meditation, that's the work of the practice. To understand those processes and understand them. It's a bit of a cliche, but just to understand them more deeply than we do, than this sort of superficial looking outwards lends itself to. So this in the Satipatthana, one can practice in a lot of, well, with different slants, different methods, but also using different insight teachings, if you like. And there's quite a strong emphasis in the Satipatthana Sutta on anicca, on impermanence. That you'll find that within the refrain, which is I think 12 or 13 times you get this 4-line refrain in the Satipatthana Sutta. But this particular practice doesn't focus so much on impermanence. If you like, it's the idea at the back of the mind that we're looking to hold is more to do with anatta. It's more to do with insubstantiality, with lack of fixity, lack of something, particularly in relation to self, in relation to this idea of self. So right view in this context is a right view of experience. What's a helpful way of looking at experience that allows the different attitudes and biases and ideas in the mind to be seen more clearly? So primarily what we're looking to do is we're looking to see more clearly the ways that delusion operates, the ways that we don't see clearly. We're also looking, and that in itself is clear seeing. We're seeing how the mind is working. We're sort of approaching wisdom through the conditioned mind, through the mind as it is, as it operates. But at the same time we're doing that, we're encouraging the way of looking, and is not of the same nature as what's being seen. So I said this in relation to awareness, and it's the same in relation to wisdom or to right view. So I've been using the language of objects of experience, and that's quite conscious, quite deliberate. So what that does is it helps us to take what's happening in experience a bit less personally, rather than experience generally being, as the reading said last night, actually, as Bhante was saying, that this sort of subjective experience, it's all about me. It's all about what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing, what I like, what I don't like, and who I like, if you like. Our sense of self extends to the things and the people around us, those that we would sort of, if you like, incorporate into our sense of me and who I am. So by doing this, by having this in a way, that this habit of holding that sense of self in abeyance, we're looking at experience, noticing what's happening, noticing thoughts, feelings, different sense objects. And as we notice them, we can just have a sense of whether we're relating to them in a personal way. This is at the back, it can be quite subtle at the back of the mind. I'm thinking this, or these are some sort of identification with our different mental and physical processes. A lot of the time we'll see that there is some identification, and if you're able to recognize that, that's wonderful. That's enough. We're not trying to make experience other than what it is. there may be times when actually there's more of a impersonal way of looking at what's happening, and that's happening quite naturally. You don't quite try and make it happen, but when you're able to see different sort of habits and biases in the mind, there's some degree of right view on experience. I know this is a little bit abstract, so I might take a few questions afterwards just to make it, just to give a chance to tease some aspects out if I've not managed to communicate them fully. So maybe I'll just fill out right view by saying a little bit about traditionally, and I think the way that it's used in this practice is quite compatible with the traditional understanding of right view, which is in relation to conditionality, in relation to karma, and in relation to the Four Noble Truths. Those are the two main teachings. But if you're putting if you like, the how we use that view of conditionality is that things that happen, our experience that happens, doesn't happen because we want it to, or because we don't want it to happen, but it happens because of the causes and conditions that support it coming into being. And when those causes and conditions change or they run out like fuel on a fire, then something else happens, something else changes. And that's our habits come about, our habits and our biases come about through, if you like, those same causes and conditions coming together. The more they come together, they're more likely to come together. I don't know, maybe there's a tendency to be grumpy or irritable. In a way, the more that that habit gets enacted out, the more likely it is to arise. The causes and conditions are, if you like, there are more moments of them in that waterfall that's running over the rocks. So it becomes more part of our being. So thinking in terms of causes and conditions also brings quite an objectivity to what's happening. When we take our experience, when we take it in a subjective way, when we take it personally, our habits can be very painful to us. We can experience not wanting to be a grumpy person. I can identify it. So I'm always like this. I don't like being like that. I wish I was more like this. There's a lot of discomfort involved when we identify with, especially things that we think of as bad habits. And there's a tendency to perhaps to want to be more. I wish I was feeling like I was yesterday, when everything was going really well, and didn't have any pain in the body, and my energy felt really good. And it's part of that tendency to want to adjust things, to want to interfere with what's happening through our wishes and our wants and our the things that we don't want. But when we're able to see things more as simply the results of habits, the results of causes and conditions that are coming into the present moment, mental factors. Sounds a little bit dry, mental qualities, but actually there's something much less personal if we can relate to our experience. Simply objects arising, happenings or arisings in experience. So this is a perspective, and it can be a really helpful perspective in helping us see our experience more clearly, see what's happening, and in a way that we're less identified with. So sometimes this language of objects and more impersonal relationship to experience can really put people off. I think I don't want that. I want to be more involved. I want to be more intimate with experience, and yeah, all that. And I get that. I completely get that. The trouble is that actually we want to be more involved with the nice bits usually, the painful, conflicted, tense, difficult bits. Actually, we don't usually want to be more involved in that, but you don't get one without the other, I'm afraid. So there we go. But I think what can help is well, obviously is we don't want to end up feeling detached from things, people that are important to us, or removed in some way. And sometimes this language of impersonality can bring that sort of concern. So what I find it helpful to think about it is that we are not becoming detached from life, but we're becoming detached or able to see more clearly klesha or defilement. So if we're able to detach from those things that cause us suffering, to the extent that we're able to see that sense of clinging and identification to experience. So even though we have some detachment from the klesha, from the defilement, we're still involved. We still feel it. We still feel what's happening, but it's a wise or a wiser involvement. So we're not detached from loving. We're not detached from life, but we're more detached from that which causes us suffering. We're more detached from the attachment, and therefore we're able to see it more clearly. So I had a question a couple of days ago about the role of inquiry. And my understanding of the question was that the inquiry was perhaps meant in quite a direct, more penetrating, perhaps more active way. So it's a really good question. So it is much less active in this way of practicing. Maybe I said it at the beginning, really. You've got that receptive attitude. It's a little bit like lying on your back on a summer night, just looking up at the night sky, and you're seeing, taking in as much of the picture as you can. And the more relaxed, the more present the mind becomes. The more awareness and right view are able to work in the mind makes its own connections. So if you like, it's very hands-off in the sense of personal involvement, this particular approach. But you set up the conditions. You use conditionality to work for you. So you set up the conditions of mindfulness and a helpful perspective, or a helpful way of viewing experience. And they do the work. And they do the work in their own time. Often there can be a bit of a pushing in us to try and make something happen, to try and capitalize on any of those aha moments. Oh, if I just sort of try a bit more, maybe I'll see more. What that can do is just bring in a stronger sense of self that's not seen, that's not recognized in that pushing. There can be some craving in that pushing. So just to be clear, I'm not comparing one method to another here. I'm just saying in this particular method, you really watch out for that sense of personal effort, which can often be hijacked by craving, unseen craving. Craving is fine in the mind if it's recognized, if what it's doing is if the light of awareness is turned on that. And you can feel, over time, you can feel when awareness and right view are operating well in the mind, when there's stronger factors in that waterfall of conditions. You can feel that, you can feel it in the continuity of awareness. You can feel it in the types of moments when you see more clearly, when solutions to problems or communication difficulties, whatever it is, are seen, are resolved in some way. So all the little sort of insight moments that I'm sure you're very familiar with, in a way, they're sort of part of, in a way, that feedback loop of confidence that actually can give us confidence that receptive practice it's okay to not be sort of putting in that strong trying, doing effort. So I have got more to say, but actually I think enough. That's probably enough for now. So, and I can, maybe say something a bit later. But if there are questions, maybe particularly in this area, if in relation to what I've said, if there's something that's not quite clear, and I can say a bit more about it, then asking your question will help that.
Can I ask a question?
Who? Linda.
It's Linda.
Yes.
Yeah. I just wanted to check out if you've got some guidance for if we are getting that a bit of a sense of detachment, because I have been experiencing that. It's helpful what you've said, very much so, about it being more about being able to see the klesha defilements more clearly. But at the same time, my experience is that I'm starting to feel a bit more detached and noticing a tendency to think, oh, what can I do to become more involved in something to make me feel more connected or something like that.
Yeah, so how does that detachment, what does it feel like? What's it, you describe it?
Well, it's not pleasant. It's feeling sort of, yeah, there's definitely some craving in there of trying to sort of not feel detached because I'm not enjoying feeling detached or something. But at the same time, I'm noticing there's times of a lot of calmness and Yeah, I can relate to that sort of feeling of there's, in a particular situation I'm in at the moment, there's definitely, I can feel that there's still love in this situation, which is very painful, but I'm not so caught up in it. So that's sort of like a plus side of this experience.
Okay.
But yeah, there's just not, I'm sort of, I suppose I'm looking for some joy or something, you know.
Okay. Yeah.
So a bit of craving for joy or expectation that there should be some joy here, and actually I'm just feeling a bit detached.
Yeah. Okay, so it sounds like you're noticing a lot that's going on, which is great. So if you're feeling a bit detached, then in a way make sure that well, a good question to ask is how is what's the feeling in the mind? So in a way you're clear that you're not sort of detaching from feeling tone. You feel there's a feeling in relation to that object, or you feel, what does aversion feel like in the mind? What does craving feel like in the experience? Detachment doesn't mean not interested. So there's a sense of, oh, okay, so you're recognizing craving, recognizing various things. That's your experience. So like you say, you're recognizing the desire for something else to be there, recognizing, and that creates a sense of lack in the mind, doesn't it? In our experience, we're wanting something else to be there. But the task in this particular practice is to be just with what's there. So what's craving like in the mind? What does it feel like? And that interest is or willingness to be with what's actually happening, and not just in a sort of stoic, oh God, I suppose I have to, but what is that like? You know, maybe it's the first time you've ever really thought, I'll just be with that and be curious about it. So that's one thing. And the other thing that struck me from what you said is that sometimes when we experience quite a lot of calm, there's a sort of peacefulness. There can be a peacefulness, and what can be happening is quite subtle. And Martine Batchelor is very good on this, actually. She's talking about subtle or neutral Vedana, and she said if we don't see them from very clearly, or don't see them from the wisdom perspective, then they tend to give rise to feelings of doubt, or it's not quite enough, a sort of lack, that neutrality becomes lack. But when they're seen more from a wisdom perspective, they're much more in the realm of equanimity and peacefulness. And sometimes it's because again, there's an expectation or ideas in the mind that it should be different, or this isn't enough. But what's that like? What's that? And if the attending to what's happening is has the qualities of awareness, then that can quite subtly but measurably change an experience. From that more sort of slightly sort of uncomfortable side of neutrality to something that's subtly satisfying and very significant to be with.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Angela.
Unmuted now?
Yes.
Yeah, my Wi-Fi went a bit wobbly, so I wasn't sure if I quite missed it. But what I've written down is something you said, we're going through the conditioned mind to do this, but what we're doing is not of the same nature as a conditioned mind. Is that
The,
what you said?
the mind that's observing is not of the same nature. So the mind that's aware, I'm not saying that it's unconditioned,
Right.
but it's of a different nature to say aversion has its own nature. It's sort of hot and fiery, but it can be, and that's a habit in the mind, but it can be observed with something that's has quite a different sort of flavor, different nature to it. If it's able to see a little bit more objectively, if it's able to see and know what's being seen, rather than being sort of merged, if you like, with the whole ball of anger. There's anger, and there's a recognition of what's happening that feels different. It feels different in the mind.
I see, yeah. So they're all qualities of the mind. We're not talking about some otherness of the mind. It's all different properties of the mind that we know that we're using.
That's it.
Makes more sense, yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, can I?
Vajradevi.
I really appreciate you talking about the language that you're using, and I'm reflecting on how tricky, it's such a delicate territory that you're talking about, that how to help us to really kind of, how I would put it would be how we come into relationship with ourselves, which is different from talking about the language of objects. Although my experience is when I come into relationship to myself, that there's a sense of, because there's not so much identification, I'm wrapping awareness around whatever's going on. And that allows me to then stand seeing something or feeling something, or understanding something, not dismissing it, feeling it, but yeah, it feels like then something can move on. I suppose that's what happens in my experience. But I'm just curious because it seems to me that quite often, because we hold very deep self-hate in ourselves, that it can be very easy to kid ourselves on, so that we think that what we're doing is becoming more detached or objective or whatever, but actually what we're really doing is kind of pushing something away or not wanting to see it. So I just wanted to raise that and ask you, because you're coming from a very, actually there's a very sort of, there's a breeze of metta through all the way that you talk, and I'm aware that that isn't always there for all of us. So.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So the bit of what I was going to say that I didn't get to is around the language of relationship and how we're relating to experience. But maybe just to say, for the objects is one word, and it's sort of, in a way, it shows up in that objective subjective. How we're usually in a subjective relationship, so maybe it just highlights that. It highlights that there's a different way to be with the experience rather than identified with it. But the other two words that I used can sound, they can be used as well. These happenings. There's moments of happenings. There's moments of arising, experience arising all the time. So feel free to use use them or notice with those different sorts of framings will have a slightly different feel to it.
So
So what I was going to say in relation to the relationship, which is maybe not quite the same as you were saying, but a lot of the work takes place in seeing not just the objects of experience, like the grumpy mind state that arises, but how we're relating to that. So that also becomes an object. And at times, if it might seem like the object that arises is the grumpy mind. But when we've got that sort of quite broad awareness, at some point we're able to recognize, or able to say, oh, I'm not actually relating to this. This is not. I'm not able to notice this with awareness. It's actually quite. I might think it's awareness. I might have the idea that it's awareness. It's quite aversive. You know, there's a not wanting to have this experience. And so that then becomes what we turn our attention to. It's like, oh, okay. So in a way, you don't lose sight completely of the object, but it can be helpful. Just in a way, you come a bit closer to home. Each time you come a bit closer. That's what's happening. Oh, what's that like? What does that feel like? I think the saving grace is often, what does it feel like? And that sense of interest, which has the flavor of metta, it's counter to the tendency to judge or to feel averse. It's a tall order and a big ask, I think, to, like you say, self-hatred is very strong for many of us, and when that's in operation, or when we see that's how we're relating to part of our experience, it's not easy, and the awareness definitely needs those qualities of allowing, acceptance of metta. And when it doesn't have them, sometimes there can be a lot of freedom in this practice because of that objectivity. It can give you a little bit of breathing space. It's another way of talking about detachment, but I think it's a lot more helpful in a way. Breathing space from, oh right, it's just judgment. It's that little word just. It's and so there's a new perspective, a new free perspective on deeply painful experiences, and it allows us to see that it's possible to be with them, but without that sense of identification. And those moments are just deeply important.
That all makes sense. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay. I'm only seeing people on my front page. I hope that doesn't mean there are lots of other people who are waving and I'm just not seeing them. Anyway, maybe that's enough for now. We'll leave it for now, and you can always email me, or I hope that in the next day or so we will have a chance for more questions, just to more general questions. Maybe tomorrow, maybe the day after, we'll see. But for now, let's just have a couple of minutes leg stretch, and then we'll sit, and I'll lead us through the sit. So take up whatever posture you feel comfortable. Feel free to try out standing again if it worked for you yesterday. Sitting, lying down. So just to say, there are many other ways in which we can reinforce a helpful perspective, a helpful Dharma perspective on our experience. Many different ways in our practice, through our ethical practice, through our Dharma study, communication with friends. And I was also thinking of the Shunyata mantra that I particularly love, which that connects with this word nature. Been using nature in terms of things having their different natures, but ultimately all are of shunya, they're all empty nature. So you don't really need to do that much with what we've been talking about just now, but let it work away at the back of your mind. I just thought of a Zoom analogy in terms of all these different views in the mind, wrong views, and then there's right view. So depending on who's speaking, when you have the Zoom on the speaker view, you have the certain perspective in operation, you have a certain point of view. And what we're looking to do is, in the background, just have a perspective, a helpful perspective on all those views coming through, so that at least some of the time there's that perspective of right view on experience, how the Buddha would have thought. At any time you notice that, not something you have to try and do, but something you can notice. And you can also notice that corresponding sense of freedom from the mind seeing something from a new and more creative perspective. But all that being so, the practice is still receptive in nature. So allowing that connection with your experience as it is now. Relaxing into physical body sensations. Perhaps noticing how it is when awareness is embodied. Knowing objects of experience. Having a sense of how you're relating to those experiences. And particularly noticing when there's some degree of interest, acceptance, but also equally importantly noticing those times or those objects where there isn't acceptance, there's a wishing for things to be different or a disengagement. What's that like? What's disengagement or boredom or conflict like in the mind? How does it feel? Can there be an allowing when the mind feels quite full of thoughts or feelings? Settling back, allowing it to just roll on, letting more attention rest with the awareness of it. And it's exactly the same if the mind feels There's not much happening. Again, resting with the knowing quality, the awareness. What's that like? And not dropping in the questions for any particular answer, but just to stimulate curiosity. When we recognize thoughts or views that reveal subjective relationship to the experience, sense of I am doing it, similar, identifying with the particular experience, craving or worrying, sleepiness. If you recognize there's some wrong view of self, some wrong view of experience, also recognize that right view can know wrong view. So it's a cause for celebration. Right view, recognizing different moments of the delusive mind. And that recognition will strengthen that factor. Right view, clear seeing. Remembering that the objects being known, being observed, are less significant than the quality of the mind that's noticing and knowing. And remembering to let the awareness be broad, relaxed. Noticing if you got caught or fixating on one particular object. You don't need to let go of it, but recognize that focusing, that fixing. And through that recognition, just seeing what else is in your experience. Without casting around for it, simply relaxing and broadening. Our views are often very implicit and subtle. Part of us like a second skin. So don't worry if you don't particularly notice much. Just continue to grow awareness. Be present to what's happening. And every now and again, just checking presence or absence of right view. In this way, we just contribute to the growing of the causes and conditions, the strengthening of those conditions that allow insight to flourish. What is the mind knowing through the different realms of experience, different happenings, arisings? Of hearing, seeing, touching, smelling, and the mind sense. Just before we finish, I'm going to read this poem by Charlotte Yoko Beck. It's not that I hear the birds, it's just hearing the birds. Let yourself be hearing, seeing, thinking. It is the false I that interrupts the wonder, with the constant desire to think about I. And all the while, the wonder is occurring. The birds sing, the cars go by, the body sensations continue, the heart is beating. Life is a second by second miracle, but dreaming our I dreams, we miss it. So let's have a few minutes just before we break for tea, just if there's anyone who'd like to just talk about any aspect of their experience where they felt present, interested, curious. And also, it doesn't need to be from the practice just now, but it might be from the walking or from the standing yesterday, or something that happened within your daily life practice. We'll just take just 2 or 3 people before we have tea. Akashari, yeah. You're muted, yeah, that's it.
Yes, thank you, Vajradevi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yesterday, I'm not sure whether I get what you're trying to communicate yet. The English sometimes is a bit sort of much to sort of then translate it quickly into Dutch. So just a question, yesterday I was doing nothing practice. And I noticed I was being aware to whatever sensations were arising. And which lasted quite a while. And then I became aware of the thought, if I could be like this all the time, then I would be in the future, life would be perfect, whatever. Then I noticed that thought, and the label came, oh, I am appropriating my experience now into the future. So I saw that I was doing the appropriating, and then I just sat with that realization. And then I felt really calm and peaceful. But now I'm not sure, is there more to do than just recognizing the appropriating the thought, or are you pointing to something else that we need to look at, or I don't know.
Okay, yeah, great. Yeah, so appropriating, I think from what you're saying is it's some aspect of craving. Yeah. So in a way, they perhaps see the thing to do. It's like with okay, so there's thought in the mind, and has a particular sort of flavor. So what's also in the mind is that feeling of appropriating. So
Say that again. What's in the mind?
Is the feeling, is also the feeling of how that craving felt, how that appropriation felt.
Oh yes, I did feel that.
Yeah.
Yes, I felt like my body was leaning forward, and there was an area in my body where the energy was sort of congesting.
Great. Yeah. So I think if there's anything sort of extra from today, and this may have been part of how you were observing anyway, how you were noticing, but that sense of, is it, I know language is tricky, so it's different when we say things, but is that sense of, I'm appropriating? So is that sense of selfing sort of happening around that, or is it just, there's appropriation happening, or craving happening, and knowing that through how it feels, that contraction, or the things that you described. So that's the only other thing. It's like the recognition of is this being seen in this more sort of subjective way, and can that be recognized? Can I recognize that? Or is a sort of, simply different sort of factors that awareness is knowing. So yeah, that's the difference, or that's just a very slight little extra.
So are you saying, rather than me saying, I am appropriating, are you saying then a more helpful language would be, appropriating is happening? Or have I got this right?
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't say that this morning, but that's using that sort of passive voice. Jessica talks about this passive voice can be very helpful. It's like, and that's why I said, what is the mind knowing? In a way, it's like, it's not possible to get rid of all the yous and the I's from language, but sometimes it can, how we sort of speak to ourselves can help. That it's craving happening. That's what it's like. This is what it's like. Rather than it becoming a thing that's a part of me, in a way, rather than in a way appropriating it into our idea of ourself.
All right. Okay.
Yeah.
I need to write this down because.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. I appreciate it's the mind is very subtle, and the mind is tricksy, so it's not easy to retain this, and we're in a way trying to put sort of concept onto a moving, sliding landscape of mental, emotional, physical experience. Yeah, so don't worry if your sort of grip of it feels a bit partial. I think that's understandable. I think it was quite a number of years before I think I really quite knew what was being got at. It's because we need to find experience. We have some experiences, but we need to sort of put language and experience together. That's what that is, and that takes time. Anyone else?
Hi Vajradevi, it's Varasaki here.
Varasaki, great, yes.
Hello. So I have chronic fatigue, and I have quite strong fatigue today, but I noticed in that I was lying down, I noticed how my mind was splitting off and comparing an idea of what's, how I need to include myself, how I need to be, even in terms of diary commitments. There's something forward looking, I leaning into the forwardness around energy, an idea of needing to have enough energy, not being enough. And what I noticed is, I just thought, oh, clocked it, yes, okay, energy-wise. And I just felt really, instantly, from really deep fatigue to absolute refreshment of energy. And this bright, clear, fresh energy just came in and just stayed. And I just thought, yes, it's that comparing mind. It's just where it kind of splits off. And so just wanted to share that. It was really lovely. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, our ideas, I think, often are so heavy, you know, without us realizing it. There's so much weight in that idea of the future, and in a way, a momentary experience now, oh God, it becomes a 1,000 times worse when it's thought of in the future, and the mind seeing that, and then in this case, just dropping it. Experiencing that lightness. Thank you for sharing. Lovely. Yeah. Okay, so let's leave that there for now. And what time is it? Okay, it's 12. Maybe we just take 10 minutes today, if that's without any rushing. Just have a quick drink, and we'll come back at 12 for a final sit, and I've got another reading by Bhante. So just to say, apparently I did miss a couple of people who were wanting to speak earlier. So and there was something in the chat which I also missed. So if there's the option to email me if you'd like to. With anything about your own practice, but also questions about the practice. So I'm going to read something from Bhante from Living with Awareness. Just one thing to say as well. It also seemed like some people didn't have that good reception during the last session. And there's one person saying here, turning the video off to get better reception. So that might help if you find that might help if it's from your end. If it's my end, then there's something I can do if I know about it. Okay. So we'll sit for about 15 minutes after the reading, and then I'll just say a couple of things about the what's happening later in the day. So Bhante, Living with Awareness, from page 34 and 35. How the effort to develop insight within meditation is made is quite difficult to explain. You have to look actively for insight into the true nature of things, but without looking for it in any particular direction or in any particular way. It is a sort of active receptivity. You are actively holding yourself open to insight. These two aspects of the practice, receptivity to something outside yourself, so to speak, and an active searching, are equally important. The quest for insight demands exertion, not intellectual exertion, but a meditative, intuitive searching. Not trying to think your way to reality, but trying to see it directly. This is not to say that insight will necessarily arise directly as a result of insight practice. Sometimes it happens that you're trying too hard or not in quite the right way. When you release that effort, the momentum of your practice may continue to build, and insight might suddenly strike you out of the blue when you're doing something ordinary like peeling potatoes. There is no situation, whether positive or negative, pleasant or painful, in which insight may not arise. All that is needed is mindfulness. So your task today, should you choose to accept it, is, I mean, all these are just suggestions to help highlight certain aspects of our day-to-day experience. So as much as just wherever you can, just present to different activities. But the one I'm going to suggest today is eating and drinking, particularly eating. So that's the sense of taste and touch, movement. There's taste, there's chewing, how something changes from the first taste to the moment of swallowing. There's a whole field of experience around taste that you might want to explore, and noticing how the mind is. I think it's particularly interesting to notice wanting, liking, not wanting. You know, why you eat some things first, or why you sort of save up certain bits for, you know, those habits go with certain factors in the mind that can be known, and it can be fun noticing, oh, okay, seeing what's happening. In a way, it gives us a sense of how our likes and dislikes, our desires and discontents, it gives us a sense of them in operation in quite in ways that it's quite easy to not judge ourselves about. It's like, oh, I'm not very keen on the peas. Like, you know, that you've got direct sort of feedback on that, and what that feels like. And then sometimes it shifts. It's like, it's all nourishment. So that's task for today. And of course, incorporate any of the others from previous days if you can, particularly the walking meditation and the doing nothing. So groups today. I thought, as last time we perhaps talked more historically about practice or your relationship to mindfulness. This time it's probably good to be more current. You're more present with what's happening now, what's actually been happening in the last few days particularly. And not just sitting practice, but the different types of practice, including all the different ways of practicing within your home environment or your work environment, whatever you've been doing. And tonight, that's what I wanted to say about tonight. So I'm very glad that Dharmavasata is here on the retreat. There she is. Tonight we're going to be, I'm going to lead the a puja that Dharmavasata compiled from Ryokan's poetry. So it's a Ryokan Puja, or a hermit puja, sometimes called, which I've been on retreat when Dharmavasata and I've been on retreat together. She's led it, and then occasionally I've led it myself. So it's in the style of, it's not a call and response puja. So it's very much like a meditation. And we'll be bringing Amitabha on board to frame that puja. So yeah, that's all I've got to say. So I hope you have a good afternoon, and see you at 5. Yeah, 5. You'll be meeting from 4:20 to start at 4:30. And thank you, Caroline, for putting my email address up there on request. So anybody who wants to write, please do. I'm enjoying reading your letters. Okay, so see you later.